G'day guys, welcome back to another episode of Adventure News. Plenty of great stories to get through for June of 2024. Bikes like the 2025 Yamaha Tenere 700, which has just been caught out testing. We've got the 390 Adventure back in the news with fresh new footage, as well as gearbox wars between the manufacturers. It looks like KTM and Yamaha are jumping on the bandwagon for semi-automatic and automatic gearboxes. So there seems to be a real arms race going on at the moment with that stuff. We've also got what looks to be the 990 Adventure R coming back from the dead.
Start it up.
Hot off the heels of KTM being out caught testing their 1390 series of adventure bikes, we've got spy shots of what looks to be a 990 Adventure R, which is pretty exciting news if you're one, into middleweights, two, if you love KTMs, and three, you really miss your old 950 or 990. The recipe is pretty well known at this point. We're getting WP suspension, of course. We're getting those twin side tanks that have been made so famous. It is still using the LC8 motor. Now it's in a new 990 configuration. Now it is called the 990, but it actually is 947 cc's, and there are quite a lot of significant differences. So it's got new pistons, a new rod, a new crank, a different exhaust and cam timing, and the bore has been increased from 90.7 millimeters up to 92.5 millimeters. And the stroke length has also been increased. Now I would expect not to get the full 121 horsepower that the 990 Duke does have. I would expect KTM to do what they usually do in these situations and retune the bike for a more off-road riding purposes rather than all-out peak power. You should still see a decent increase in both horsepower and torque over the 890 series adventure bikes. But what I will say is I really like the clean, simplistic look of this. Now what is different about those fuel tanks, as you can see, is they do look a lot slimmer than what you see on the 790 and 890, where they're very bulbous down low, which has been a little bit of a complaint from some owners about when it does get really tight and tricky. Whereas this 990, it looks like they have slimmed down the tanks. That could possibly mean that the bike might be a little bit more top heavy, but potentially it has gained more maneuverability in the really tight stuff. There are a few eagle-eyed journalists stating that there's the potential for a rear tank on this 990 as well, given the spy shots. So that could potentially mean that you will have a super long range version of this bike. Whether it will be an option or whether this bike will just have incredible range across all of the variants of this bike, who knows? It is great to see an option for a super tanker version of this 990 Adventure R potentially in the works. The other big question on my mind with this KTM 990 Adventure is whether the differences in this new 990 engine are actually going to address what looks to be a growing problem with cam wear problems with the 790 and 890 Adventures, the LC8C. At the moment, it's just anecdotal stories of owners having these problems on forums, and KTM is yet to admit there is a problem. But I wonder, conspiratorial hat on my head, whether the new 990 is a very easy way for them to address the problem without admitting there's a problem. That's a very interesting development that I want to keep an eye on. Next up is the beloved Tenere 700, and for 2025 we're getting a refreshed version of the Tenere 700. So that means by 2030, America should see this model, because I know you guys have had problems getting your hands on them. This isn't a ground up redesign, this isn't an all new model, but they also haven't been lazy and made no changes at all. One of the main differences is the air intakes. This actually has the air intake of the World Raid rather than the standard Tenere, which has it in the conventional position under the seat. These air intakes are up front, so it's more of a ram air. Now, the hypothesis is that is either an air intake or it could be some kind of cooling system for the engine. We're not really 100% sure, but the theory behind it being air intakes and not just a cooling system is the fact that the World Raid did have this, and those air intakes being at the front of the bike, having air rammed into the engine, could account for a slight bump in horsepower, which would really help set the 2025 model apart from the existing model. The other big change is, of course, the aesthetics. It has changed from the existing model. Now, it isn't a huge departure from what the Tenere already looks like. It just looks like a nip and a tuck to bring things into a more modern look. It's really hard to tell how the whole thing will come together with a lot of the fairing fairing being hidden and occluded. We'll have to wait and see how the whole aesthetic package comes together, but it is good to see Yamaha keeping things fresh. If we look at the spy photos, you can see that Yamaha are testing a new rear suspension linkage system. And how does that help the suspension? Well, depending on the linkage you use, you can actually increase the progression of the rear suspension. If you look at the zoomed in picture as well, you can see on that linkage that it actually says MED on it. So the theory is that stands for medium, which suggests that Yamaha are testing different versions of this linkage. It looks like the seat and the shrouds have been hidden a little bit. Presumably that will mean there will be a change. It is very hard to tell in these photos, them being covered up and all. Other than that, it doesn't look like, from at least these spy photos, that there's any other big significant changes. Next up, we got the 2025 KTM 390 Adventure. I'm not going to dive into all the specification details. We've talked about that ad nauseum. What I did want to talk about is the latest video that has dropped. This bike looks very close to production and looks very polished in this video, which is really exciting. It's led to a lot of media outlets suggesting that we should see this bike being revealed at the big motorcycle shows at the end of this year. And it's thought that we will see this bike on showroom floors as early as Q1 2025, which is really exciting. The other thing that stands out in this video is I'm really confident about the wheel size on this particular bike. This looks like a 1917 wheel combination. Now, what we don't know from KTM is whether they're going to have a 2-model lineup in the Adventure series, or whether they're going to offer all 3 models, the Enduro, the base model Adventure, and then an Adventure R. We have seen all 3 models being tested. Definitely on KTM's mind, trying to decide which way to go. So KTM, you're probably not watching this, but if you are, definitely do an Adventure R for the 390. I think the masses are screaming for it. We all want a single cylinder, lightweight, proper off-road capable adventure bike. It really is frustrating when we constantly see manufacturers pulling their punches when it comes to really throwing the kitchen sink and making an off-road capable adventure bike in the small displacement market. And worst case scenario, if we don't get an Adventure R, people will still have the Enduro, which looks to be fairly dirt capable, as it well should, because it is going to be more of the dual sport in the lineup. The one thing I would like to say is, guys, please be realistic about the weight. We have the weight of the 2024 390 Duke, which has the engine of this new Adventure for 2025, and it is only a few kilos different from the outgoing Duke. So I think it's reasonable to expect that this will be roughly a few kilos different to the outgoing 390 Adventure, so don't get your hopes up too much. What would you like to see? Would you like to see an Adventure R alongside the standard model, or are you happy with the 1917 cast wheels as more of the Adventure Tourer for the adventure bike, and keep the Enduro as the real hardcore off-road machine? Chuck your thoughts down below. Next up, let's talk about gearbox wars. It looks like a lot of manufacturers are moving towards automatic gearboxes for motorcycles, or at least e-clutches, like on the Honda. Yamaha have just announced that their e-clutch is going into production. I talked about it recently in patents that revealed that they were working on it. They have just announced that they will be applying it to quite a few of the models in their lineup for customers. So I think it's a pretty big win for people if you've got an injury, or you do commuting and you're just tired of heaps and heaps of gear shifting, or maybe you just want to make it a little bit easier for yourself off-road. These semi-automatic and automatic gearboxes can be a real help for people. Now, we've also got BMW announcing they're working on one. KTM have just announced their own automatic, so it is a more complicated system. They've announced it through revealing their 1390 Adventure R when they raced it in the Erzberg Rodeo this year. So it only just happened recently. So not only did we get a look at a fairly well disguised but pretty production ready 1390 Adventure R, but we also found out that it will come with an automatic transmission if you want it. It seems the rest of the manufacturers are finally taking notice that actually a lot of people really prefer to have a semi-automatic or automatic transmission. I think there's good things ahead if you're into semi-automatics or automatic gearboxes on your motorcycle. So that's it for this episode of Adventure News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, guys, don't forget to stay shiny side up.